My name is Jenna. I'm one of the co-presidents of the Turning Point chapter at JMU. I have a question. How do you balance telling the truth with delivery and speaking to people who disagree with you?
So I think obviously the truth comes first. We ought to be polite, but the truth comes first. And if you can tell the truth in a polite way, that's the best way to do it. But sometimes people perceive truth as impolite, and that's just the way of the world. You know, I rather famously have said that facts don't care about your feelings, and that happens to be true. You know, when you engage in a conversation, I've said this to a lot of people, when you engage in a conversation, it's very important to sort of determine the end of the conversation. If it's going to be impossible to tell somebody the truth in a productive way, you probably shouldn't engage in that kind of conversation, and you should make that judgment ahead of time. But truth always has to take precedence over politeness if the two come into conflict, particularly if you're talking publicly, as we all do for a living. I'm not talking about you're talking to your kid and they bring you a macaroni painting and they're like, is it good or not? You're like, no, this is terrible, and you stuff it in the trash. It is terrible, but say that it's good, and then later you kind of put that. I understand. But when we're talking about politics and policy, obviously the truth has to come first, because if we can't agree on fundamental facts, there's no possibility for solutions.
Thank you for being here, Ben. You cited during your speech truth as the most important tenet of American conservatism. Why, therefore, did you call irrelevant the Israeli attack in 1967 on the USS Liberty, which left dozens of American servicemen dead and hundreds wounded?
So what I actually said is that if we're looking at modern Israeli-American relations, looking at an attack that happened mistakenly by multiple Navy reports, multiple Israeli reports, and all available evidence, and using that attack in order to undermine today's relations between Israel and America, that's irrelevant. As irrelevant as it would be to cite a piece of evidence from World War II or from 1776 to define America's relations with, for example, Great Britain or Germany today. That does not mean that the attack wasn't horrible for the Americans involved, that it wasn't bloody and terrible. The Israeli government paid reparations to the people who were killed. If you look at the actual military record of what happened on the USS Liberty, it was clearly a mistaken and tragic attack. The people who frequently cite the USS Liberty, however, are not talking about the specifics of the USS Liberty. I suspect that the vast majority of people who bring this up are doing so in order to suggest that Israel deliberately attacked an American ship because Israel deliberately wants to harm America. It is connected generally with a larger point. I wonder if that's your point.
If the truth matters, then the Israeli government must be held accountable for that attack. The American flag was flying on that ship. You do not mistake an American ship for a foreign one when our flag is flying.
So, we can spend the rest of the time talking about the specifics of the U.S. Liberty attack, or you can actually go look at the naval investigations that were done, multiple naval investigations that were done. The reality is that people were flying Mirage planes for the Israeli military at the time. The USS Liberty was sailing in an area where it had essentially gone off-grid. The Israeli military mistook it for an Egyptian ship. They thought it was shelling Al Arish, which happened not to be true. In the initial attack, the American flag was knocked down, and then the attack went on for about 90 minutes. And then, as soon, you can hear this, by the way, on the tapes of the Israeli pilots talking to each other, as soon as they realize that it's an American ship, they call off the attack, they speed a ship to try and help the USS Liberty. There have been multiple unfortunate friendly fire incidents between Allied forces, including, for example, in the Gulf War, where U.S. forces were responsible for killing about 9 British troops during the Gulf War. It's an unfortunate reality of war, but you're not answering my question, which is, what is your broader agenda in asking the question? Because I suspect that your question is not limited to your specific ire over an incident that happened in 1967.
I think we should question any foreign country's relationship with our government.
That's totally fine, but I'm just wondering why you
serve American interests.
Again, I'm perfectly fine with questioning any country's relationship with the United States. But again, I'm wondering what your motivation is in bringing up a 6-decade-old attack as though it is the #1 issue in assessing the relationship between Israel and the United States today.
Well, many problems persist to this day, but it's interesting that you say 6-decade-old incident when there are many people in this audience who are alive for that attack, as if this is something that's irrelevant.
Well, no, it's just not particularly relevant to assessing the relationship between the United States and Israel today, in the same way that in 1967, there are a wide variety of countries with which the United States had different relations. Okay, it's clear you're not going to actually answer the question, so I'm happy to move to this one.
Unfortunately, this will be the last question.
Okay. Hi, my name is Natasha, and I'm a TPUSA chapter member at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. So my question is, just with the divide in the conservative movement right now, what is your suggestion as to how young people can kind of come together and bridge that divide and just, you know, bring unity right now?
So again, I think that unity has to be reliant on first principles. No one would ask conservatives to unite with radical trans activists, because that would be silly. And so we first have to decide what are the principles that we hold in common, and then actually determine who are our allies in that particular fight. Now, again, the coalition may shift depending on the issue. That's kind of a normal thing in politics. Sometimes you're going to have different allies than you have with regard to other issues. But when it comes to how young people ought to decide what they believe, that's the thing I most care about. Because if I'm talking about the long-term trends of America, not merely the coalitions of the moment, which break and reform and break constantly. Right? George W. Bush's coalition was obviously not Donald Trump's coalition, and Donald Trump's coalition is not going to be J.D. Vance's coalition, meaning every politician has their own coalition. That's the nature of electoral politics. What I'm more concerned about is the trajectory of how people think and what people think. And so before determining how to unify with others, you should first decide what are the things that are important to you. What are your fundamental values? And then you should find people who agree with those fundamental values, because the problem is if you don't, then when push comes to shove, things come apart pretty quickly. I'll take one more.
Hi, Ben. Big fan of yours and stuff, and I'm currently a college sophomore, and my university just started a chapter, and it got approved. So just for your advice, how can we spread conservatism on campus and any hate or anything like that, just combat that, and what would your be words of encouragement?
I mean, my words of encouragement are look at Charlie Kirk, right? That's the word of encouragement. Charlie was your age when he started doing this. Again, I referenced earlier that I met Charlie when he was 18 years old. It was actually a David Horowitz Freedom Center conference, and Charlie was going around trying to meet donors. And I saw this really nerdy, tall, gangly kid walking around trying to meet people, and I started introducing Charlie to a few of his sort of original donors. And by the way, in the first conversation with Charlie, I've said this before, but it's true. Charlie walked away, and I turned to my friend Jeremy Boring. I said, that dude's going to be the head of the RNC one day. Because Charlie was just that much of a go-getter, and it turns out that he was a lot bigger than that. I think that everyone has the potential to do that. Not everybody has the same exact skill set, and you have to find the skill set that best suits you. Maybe you're great at debate. Charlie was great at debate. Actually, what's fascinating about Charlie is that Charlie made himself great at debate. I knew Charlie when he wasn't great at debate, and then I knew Charlie when he was great at debate. He actually cultivated a skill set, and it was really impressive and cool to watch him do that. That's something you can do too. So again, if Charlie can do that, a raw kid out of high school, no college degree, and build the most powerful conservative organization in America, then you can do it too, because that's what America's all about. You're an American, go do it. Thank you so much.